The New York Rangers have several promising prospects, and we are telling you which ones have the most long-term potential.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1369 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, and today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year, and we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, thought it would be a good time to do a little bit of prospect talking. We've kind of done that off and on the entire offseason as it is. But what kind of got me wanting to shift my attention back to the young players, the prospects in the New York Ranger pipeline, was an article posted by Dan Rosen on NHL.com. Now, NHL.com, they're doing their 32 and 32 gimmick that they do where they take a look at all 32 teams in the NHL over the course of 32 days. And, of course, this past week, it was the Rangers' turn, and Rosen wrote a couple of different articles for NHL.com, and one of them focused in on what he believes to be the top 5 New York Ranger prospects. So what we're going to do here, we're going to first react to his list. I'm going to have some thoughts on some of the players. Then I'm going to go ahead, present you guys with my list as well, my top 5 New York Ranger prospects. It's a little bit different than Dan's, but there's obviously some similarities there as well. And then at the end of today's episode, also going to continue the prospect theme. We're going to take a look at the final player that was drafted by the New York Rangers in this year's draft. That was defenseman Felix Färhammar. But once again, we start with Dan Rosen's top 5, and we'll start at number 1. We'll work our way back to number 5. His number 1 pick for the best Ranger prospect was Gabe Perreault. This is a pretty obvious choice, and spoiler alert, this is one thing that Dan and I certainly have in common. We've got Gabe at number 1. I think just about anybody, whether you're a Ranger fan, a beat writer, a podcaster, TV person, whatever it might be, I think pretty much everybody is going to have Gabe Perreault at number 1. There's no guarantees, but I think in terms of just the overall raw skill that this man possesses, it'd be pretty much a stretch to put anybody else in this spot. Rosen in his article talked how Gabe Perreault has actually been training or was training with Patrick Kane for parts of this offseason as well. He also mentioned that Perreault competed in the Ranger development camp from June 30th to July 2nd, and you got to figure he's going to be competing in the Rangers-Flyers Rookie Series that will happen on September 12th and September 13th. The vast majority of players that compete in those two games are guys that have not yet played in an NHL game, but I certainly think they'll make an exception for Gabe Perreault, given the fact that he is so young, and he did just finish college hockey, and he only played in 5 Ranger games at the end of what was a lost season for the Rangers this past year. So I think for sure Gabe will play in that tournament. Dan Rosen also had a couple of different quotes from Jed Ortmeyer, who is, of course, the Rangers director of player development, and at times has come under fire for his performance there. It's been a mixed bag, to be fair, but this is what Ortmeyer had to say about Gabe Perreault. He's putting the work in and knows what he needs to do to get himself ready and showcase what he can do. Number 2 on Dan Rosen's list was Scott Morrow. Now, obviously, Morrow, he can't really be considered a Ranger homegrown prospect, but I certainly think we can still consider him a prospect. He has not played that many games in the NHL. I believe it's 16 regular season games and then 5 playoff games for Scott Morrow. And obviously, Morrow was part of the Keandre Miller trade. I still can't believe what the Rangers got in that deal. It was Morrow, a first rounder, and a second rounder. The article mentions that Morrow's got good size. He stands at 6'2", 210 pounds. I did not realize that Morrow had that kind of size. And honestly, by NHL defenseman standards, I mean, that's probably only like a little bit bigger than average. But, I mean, this is not a small player by any means. And if I'm not mistaken, in a recent episode, I mentioned that, again, at least by NHL defenseman standards, that he might be on the smaller size, but that is not true at all. So that's my mistake there. I'll certainly acknowledge that. A lot of new players, a lot of moving pieces, trying to get to know all of them. But yeah, Morrow's got some size and some offensive skill on top of all that. And per this article, Ortmeyer said that getting NHL games, particularly in the playoffs, has helped him set up his summer training and gave him an understanding of the pace and style of play. And yeah, Morrow played in all 5 games of the conference final last year between the Canes and the Panthers, and obviously the Canes got bumped. But yeah, I mean, that's great experience. You're going up against a team that ultimately won its second straight Stanley Cup. That's good stuff right there. And I'm not going to do this very often, but I guess we should thank the Canes for getting Morrow into some postseason games last season as he continues the season and, get ready for his NHL career. Although I would think that he'll probably start this upcoming season in the AHL. No guarantees there. He could certainly crack the roster, but if I had to guess right now, that's where I would lean. Number 3 on Dan Rosen's article was Brennan Othmann. This article points out the obvious discrepancy in goal scoring for Othmann between the AHL and the NHL. Othmann has scored at every level of hockey that he's ever played except for the NHL. Now, obviously, he's still getting used to being in the NHL. I believe it's just 25 games or 25 games last season with the New York Rangers, something in that ballpark. But yeah, in the AHL last season, Othmann ended up with 33 goals in 94 games. And then in the NHL, here we go, 25 games, 0 goals, and just 2 assists. So the scoring hasn't been there. It's been there at every other level throughout Othmann's career, though, especially in the OHL, also the AHL. The article also makes mention of the upper body injury that Othmann suffered that slowed him down a little bit last season, potentially contributed to him not having, a sparkling run with the Rangers this past year. For what it's worth, though, he was very physical, so that was certainly encouraging. And there's a quote from Ortmeyer on Othmann as well. We're excited to see the work he has put in the summer and what he learned last year. As you can tell, these quotes are very manila, but I mean, it is what it is. They're not gonna say too much. They're not gonna go overboard with their praise or their criticism. They're gonna keep it pretty generic, and obviously that's what Ortmeyer's doing for most of these quotes here. At number 4 on Rosen's list, he goes with Malcolm Spence, the first player drafted by the Rangers in this year's class, but not a first rounder. He was a second rounder. The Rangers did not have a first rounder. However, they pounced. They took Malcolm Spence at number 43 overall. And most Ranger fans that I've seen at least seem pretty happy with this pick. This is somebody that's kind of a Swiss Army knife, has a really solid all-around game, doesn't necessarily excel in any one area, but somebody that seems to have a safe floor in the NHL and could probably be a third liner. Maybe even, you'd say a middle sixer at some point. But he is going into his freshman year of college at the University of Michigan. Again, he's somebody that in this past year's draft, a couple months ago, just a month or two ago, whatever it was, doesn't necessarily have as high of a ceiling as some of his peers, but somebody that's just rock solid in every area of the game. This is what Ortmeyer had to say on Spence. His speed is a weapon, his skating ability too. He's tenacious with the puck. He's been able to produce at the junior level. I think it'll be a good spot for him to develop. And yeah, again, just a good all-around player. Rosen in his article predicted that Spence will debut in the 2027-2028 season with the New York Rangers. And that sounds about right. So not this season, not the season after that, but the season after that. And that would take him through, 2 years of college hockey. Maybe he starts with the Wolfpack the year after that in 2027, 2028. But that sounds about right to me. No guarantees either way, but 27, 28 sounds about right for Spence. And he also predicts a 2027-2028 NHL debut for the player we're about to talk about now, number 5 on Dan Rosen's list, and that would be defenseman E.J. Emery. Emery was the first-round pick for the Rangers last year. He went number 30 overall, played with North Dakota as a freshman this past year, had no goals and only 1 assist, but it sounds like he's typically a stay-at-home defenseman, so, you'd want a little bit more offense than that. A little bit more offense than nothing, but it sounds like he plays his role very well. And for being a stay-at-home defenseman, he does it very well and had a solid season with North Dakota. So much so, in fact, that this summer, Emery participated in the 2025 World Junior Summer Showcase. And essentially what that is, it's basically a tryout to represent your country, in Emery's case, the United States, at the 2026 World Juniors. So I hope he makes that tournament. I always have fun watching it. But the more Ranger prospects that participate in that tournament, the more fun it is, the better it is, the more interesting it is. And it's a great experience for anybody that does make it onto one of those teams. So fingers crossed that Emery can crack the United States roster in that tournament. So quick recap here, and then we'll dive into my own top 5 prospects, and we'll count those down just like we did here. But again, to recap, Rosen, 1 through 5 in order. He had Perreault, Morrow, Othmann, Spence, and Emery. My list is somewhat similar, but there's some differences there as well. And we're going to get to my list, my own personal list, in just a second. And certainly feel free to leave your own top 5 in the YouTube comment section. But we'll get to all that good stuff in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. College football is back. And honestly, There's nothing better than the energy of tailgates and being in the stands with your fellow fans. The only downside, trying to get tickets. Endless queues, hidden fees, and prices that jump at checkout. That's why I use Gametime, the app that gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay. Gametime is the absolute best. There are just absolutely amazing deals every time you open it. We are talking about your favorite college football games for as low as just $25. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Big shout out to the everydayers as always, where we continue with our fun-filled offseason series of best and worst case scenarios, where we basically just take a look at every player on the roster, discuss the good things that could happen, the bad things that could happen, and then just kind of a season outlook, a verdict, if you will, at the end of the episode. We'll probably do another one of those in the next one, potentially on Adam Fox, who's one of many players looking for at least something of a bounce-back season. But to keep everything rolling here today with the prospect talk, we just did Dan Rosen's top 5. And again, I'll run through it again real quick just to make sure we're all on the same page. Dan Rosen's top 5. Perreault, Morrow, Othmann, Spence, Emery. We'll go ahead and we will dive into my own personal top 5 here. And number 1, to the surprise of absolutely no one, I'm on the same page with Dan Rosen. I've got Gabe Perreault at number 1 overall. Everything we've read about him, everything we've seen, the numbers that he's put up at, certainly at BC when he was playing there, this is where Perreault belongs on this list. Everybody felt like it was a massive steal for the Rangers once he fell to their selection in the NHL draft a couple of off seasons ago here. People felt the Rangers got a good one. There were people saying that, he might end up going in the top 10, and obviously he did not. And I think maybe one of the things that worked against Perreault was his size or lack thereof. Listed at 5'11" and 178 pounds. It sounds like he's working to add some weight this offseason, which is always a good idea for, younger and, lankier players that are making it to the NHL. But that's great to hear. Look, the lack of size, maybe that gives some people some pause, but for me, it's not enough that I would have wanted the Rangers to take anybody else in this spot. I think it was like 23 or somewhere in that area where the Rangers got him. They got very lucky that night. As we mentioned, Perreault tore it up at Boston College. He went pro last season. Got the 5 games with the Rangers, was kind of in and out of the lineup because, of course, Peter Laviolette had to be stubborn at the end of a lost season, and Perreault's a healthy scratch for a whole bunch of games. And that's one thing I don't want. If Perreault does make the team out of training camp, then make sure he's in the lineup every night. And none of this 4th line, 7 minutes a night BS, all right? If this kid has to play, so whether it's with the Rangers in a top 9 role, he has to either be that at the bare minimum if he's going to be on the Rangers, or he should be in the AHL, playing top line minutes, top power play, all that good stuff, leading or almost leading the Wolfpack in ice time every single night. So we'll see how it goes. Again, I still lean toward Perreault starting this season in the AHL. That would be my personal preference. But if he lights it up in the offseason, or rather the preseason, I can certainly be talked into Perreault getting an opening night roster spot. Well, we will see. But Perreault, for me, no-brainer, number 1. Number 2, we're going to go with Brennan Othmann. Dan Rosen had him at number 3. I'm still going to put him at number 2. I feel like Othmann, due in part to the lack of offensive fireworks this past season, maybe his star is kind of diminished a little bit in the eyes of fans, in the eyes of, NHL media members, whatever it might be. And I guess it is a little concerning that he only ended up with 2 points in 25 games. I realize, how he's being deployed has something to do with that. His ice time, his line mates, his lack of power play time, all that stuff. But yeah, that's a very minuscule amount of points for 25 games. But I'm still going to put him at number 2. The one thing that I still love about Othmann, and the one thing that's always been on display, even with the Rangers, even when the offense has not been there, is the physicality. This guy goes out there. He's a wrecking ball. That's been his MO ever since the Rangers drafted him, that this guy plays with some bleep you. He plays with some edge. He'll get in your face, and he'll throw the body, and he'll go to the dirty parts of the rink. And again, even without the offense, he's done all those things with the New York Rangers. You look at 25 games, 49 hits in the NHL. And that's despite averaging only 9 minutes and 52 seconds of ice time. Like, it's not an enormous total, but in terms of time on the ice, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good amount. This guy's going out there and looking to hit everything that moves, and that's encouraging. And that's something that will not slump in Brennan Othmann's game. And I'll say this, too. I feel like with Othmann, this might be this is up there as far as Mike Sullivan's biggest tests with this team. As far as the biggest things on his to-do list is getting Brian Othmann ready to go and ready to play NHL hockey. I think the first thing that Sullivan has to do is bring this locker room back together, make sure everybody's pulling in the right direction, and making sure that guys go out there and give a bleep night in and night out, because there are times this season where it very much looked like they did not. So that's number one. But I think another thing that's really high on the list is getting the most out of young players, but specifically Othmann, because with Gabe Perreault, the talent is just so obvious and so apparent to anybody that watches him. Even in those 5 games with the Rangers last season, there weren't any points, but the skating, the vision, the passing, sneaky good shot. I mean, it was all there for Gabe Perreault. So Perreault, I mean, you need more than just talent in the NHL. We all understand that, but he's got talent by the bucket loads, and he's going to be just fine. And even somebody you look at like Brett Berard, I think Sullivan can coach him up too, certainly. But Berard showed a lot of promise last season, despite it being a lost season for the Rangers. And there's not quite as much riding on Berard as a 5th rounder as there is with Othmann as a 1st rounder. Othmann cannot be another 1st rounder who doesn't pan out. They got to get him right. They got to get the most out of him. As we mentioned in a recent episode, I think it's time for Brian Othmann to pretty much be a regular NHLer. I mean, I realize he's only 22, but he'll turn 23 in January, and he's a former 1st rounder, and this is the first guy that Chris Drury ever drafted. So you got to figure out a way to get the most out of him. I think Mike Sullivan will be good for that. Hopefully that works out. Hopefully Sullivan can, push Brian Othmann to new heights this upcoming season. But, it's funny because when you look at the Ranger, kind of like the lay of the land right now, they're sort of in a similar situation as they were like 5 or 6 years ago, because back then we had the kid line, right? Everybody loved the kid line. And there were times where it felt like those guys certainly brought out the best out of each other. Hedl, Kakko, and Lafreniere. Obviously, Hedl and Kakko no longer with the team. But now you have kind of like this new wave. I mean, I don't want to like call them the kid line again. That's been done. We'll come up with a different nickname if they all end up together. If they all ended up together, I guess Berard would have to be the center. But yeah, I mean, you've got 3 young forwards, and there's a lot riding on all of them. You've got Othmann, you've got Perreault, and you've got Berard, and you need to get the most out of all of them. I think Othmann is the one, though, where like it's really critical for the Rangers this year to get him unlocked, to get Sullivan to get the most out of him. But I've still got Othmann at number 2. Number 3, I'm going to go with somebody that was not ranked on Dan Rosen's list. You guys know the everydayers. Anybody that's been watching this podcast for any amount of time, I'm very, very bullish on Brett Berard. He's been one of my favorite prospects pretty much ever since the Rangers drafted him. Again, he was not on Dan Rosen's top 5 list. I'm not sure. Rosen didn't mention in his article what the cutoff is in terms of like, how many games you can play in the NHL and still be considered a prospect. Berard has played 35 games. Is that too many to be considered a prospect? I don't know. Entirely possible, though, that he just left Berard off the list altogether, and that's fine. But again, I've always been a fan. Just love his game. Competitive, tenacious, despite not being the biggest guy out there. He'll go to the dirty parts of the rink. He seems to play with a certain amount of fire, a certain amount of energy that, again, the Rangers were sorely lacking this past season. An expression that I've used multiple times on here is that the Rangers need more Will Coolies. The Rangers could use an extra Brett Berard or two as well, I think. And this is somebody that I feel like is on his way and has a chance to be, a late round steal. He wasn't taken until the 5th round. And like Perreault, I feel like his size probably worked against him for Brett Berard. Now, obviously with Perreault, a much higher thought of prospect than Berard. So whereas Perreault drops from, the top of the 1st round to the middle of the 1st round, Berard maybe this is somebody that could have gone like in the 3rd round. He drops to the 5th round instead. I mean, I don't have an exact, place to put him as far as where he should have been taken in the draft, but it does feel like the Rangers got a good one here, and it does feel like they've got somebody that at the very least will outperform his draft status as a former 5th rounder. You got to hit on some of these late round draft picks once in a while, and the Rangers have a chance to do that. We've talked about some of the big guys that they've drafted late in different various NHL draft classes, whether it's Rempe in the 6th round, or whether it's Edstrom in the 6th round, or Dylan Robrick in the 6th round. You could throw, Berard's not as big as those guys, but you can throw him in there as far as potentially being a late round steal in the 5th round. And if you want to go back even farther, guys like Jesper Foss, he was a 6th rounder, and certainly the most obvious one, Henrik Lundqvist in the 7th round, Igor Shesterkin in the 4th round. You got to find some diamonds in the rough. They're not all going to work out, and it does become a little bit of a dart throw, but you got to find some guys that in one way or another are going to contribute to your team. And hopefully Brett Berard fits that description, and I think he will. Again, I'm probably higher on Berard than most people that watch this Ranger team, but I've just always been a fan, and I'm going to stick with that. Number 4, we're going to go with Scott Morrow. Dan Rosen had Morrow at number 2 on his list. I'm going to put him at number 4. It's funny because, the Rangers trade K'Andre Miller, and I feel like that wasn't really all that surprising. The writing was on the wall. I think most Ranger fans were in favor of this, and I was saying all offseason, I think you can get a first rounder. Rangers get a first rounder, they get a second rounder, and they get Scott Morrow. And when you see that the Rangers get these 3 assets, 2 picks and a player, it's very easy to look at the first rounder and the second rounder and kind of like, wow, we got that much for him. And kind of look at Morrow as like kind of like the throw-in. Morrow's not a throw-in. There was an article written last January or February, I believe it was, where, and it's just one person's opinion, but this writer had Morrow as the number 1 prospect for the Carolina Hurricanes. So this is not just some random dude that the Canes took in the 6th round. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example, like Jackson Dorrington. Like, he was part of the JT Miller trade last offseason. And who knows? Dorrington's young. He might be a good player. He might make it to the NHL. We will see. But he was largely considered a throw-in for the JT Miller trade. This is not a throw-in. This is somebody that the Rangers have plans for. And as I've mentioned in the past, I would think he would probably start this upcoming season in the AHL, but he should be given a chance to compete. And if he makes the NHL roster, then good on him. I mean, that could certainly happen as well. It's funny because, again, there was that one article that had him as the number 1 Canes prospect, and we've got him at number 4 here. I do anyway. Maybe you have him higher than that. But, maybe the Ranger prospects are a little bit better than people are giving them credit for. I think that's certainly possible. And the other thing that I like here about this trade, and again, you're trading away a defenseman. It's good to get one back, and certainly at one that is as highly thought of as Scott Morrow seems to be. But the Rangers, it wasn't too long ago where we were talking about how, there's not a lot there in terms of depth on the blue line. There's not a lot there in the way of prospects. And in the last, 2 off seasons here, they've kind of rebolstered things a little bit. You draft EJ Emery in the first round last offseason. You draft 5 defensemen this offseason. And you trade for Scott Morrow. And Morrow, there's at least some upside there as well. And you also bring in Vladislav Gavrikov via free agency. So the Rangers, in a short amount of time here, have done a nice job replenishing their blue line, both in terms of guys that will probably start the season in the NHL and in terms of prospects that are on the way. And Scott Morrow is kind of in between those 2 groups. We'll see what ends up happening on opening night. But I would bet anything that we will see Scott Morrow on the Rangers at some point this upcoming season. And then number 5, this is a tough one for me. It was kind of a toss-up for me between both Malcolm Spence and Dylan Robrick. But because Malcolm Spence was number 4 on Rosen's list, let's shake things up a little bit. Let's have a little bit of fun. I mean, it's just an off-season prospect ranking, right? We'll put Dylan Robrick at number 5 here. Part of the reason for that is Robrick clearly is closer to being in the NHL than Malcolm Spence is. And I don't think that was part of the criteria for Dan Rosen's article, but I'll use it here at least. It's possible we see Robrick this season. He's an absolute giant. Again, 6th rounder. We mentioned him just a second ago and did a great job with the Wolfpack this past season. He ended up with 20 goals, for Hartford in what was his first season of pro hockey. And this is just 1 year after he was actually a point-per-game player in the OHL with the Oshawa Generals. He ended up with 26 goals, 46 assists for 72 points in 68 games. I realize it's junior hockey. I get that it's not the NHL, and it gets tougher than that, and his ice time will go down, and that'll bring his points down too. Fine. You know what? It's still a 6th-rounder who, one step away from pro hockey, is putting up, point-per-game production, to say nothing of his tremendous size. And size doesn't slump. 6'7", 205 pounds, and somebody that I'm definitely going to be keeping my eye on. I assume this guy, Robrick here and multiple other players on this list will participate in the Rangers-Flyers rookie series. Perreault is going to be there. You got to figure. I don't think Othmann or Berard will be there. They've played enough in the NHL that they'll probably sit this one out. Scott Morrow could maybe go either way. I mean, he's played in the NHL, and he debuted as long ago as 2 seasons ago. I believe it was just 2 games 2 years ago that he played with the Canes, but it's not like he's got a ton of NHL experience. I wouldn't mind seeing him in that game as well, but we'll see how they look to go. But I think Robrick will be there for sure, and he's gonna be tough to miss. Again, 6'7", 205 pounds, and he's somebody I'm gonna be watching very, very closely if he does participate in that tournament. But in just a second, we got one more thing to do here today. We got one more prospect to discuss. That is 7th-rounder Felix Färhammar, the final pick that the Rangers made in this year's draft. We got some intel on him. We'll talk about him in just a second. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers by discussing the final member of the New York Rangers 2025 NHL draft class, and that would be defenseman Felix Färhammar. Felix Färhammar. And if I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize. I tried to find, any video of him being drafted or anything. hard to find. So if I mispronounce it, I do apologize for that. But the fifth and final defenseman that the Rangers took in this year's class, 6'1", 185 pounds. He's also a lefty shot and taken in the seventh round at number 203 overall by the New York Rangers. And as far as his stats last season, he played in Sweden, 43 games, 3 goals, 18 assists, 21 points. He was also a plus 25 and another goal and 3 assists in 4 playoff games. Solid offensive production for a D-man. Again, I realize it's not the NHL, but that still will at least somewhat get your attention. He also played 2 games last season in the SHL, did not have any points and was an even plus minus, but that's the next step up for Färhammar in his development. As far as like negatives and positives, we'll start with the negatives first. And again, I'm not a scout or anything like that. This is just me reading different articles, finding as much information as I possibly can on the prospect in question, in this case, Felix Färhammar. So it does sound like his defensive game could use some work. And it sounds to me, again, just reading everything that I did, that he's thought of more as an offensive defenseman than a defensive defenseman. And there might be some people that don't like that would rather the Rangers find somebody that's going to dominate defensively and play well on his own end. I think by the time you get to the 7th round, it doesn't really matter. You just find somebody, there's something you like about them, and you just take them. In this case, it might be Färhammar's offensive production, as a defenseman. Another, negative, it sounds like he does struggle defending against the rush. So honestly, he would have fit in perfectly with the Rangers this past season because that was a serious problem for this team. As far as pros and things to be encouraged by, he is said to have very good mobility, makes plays at both ends of the ice, very well-rounded player, has very good vision in the offensive zone, and he will use the body and typically has good positioning defensively. It sounds to me, again, like the biggest issue is, I guess defensive game in general, but more specifically, his issues against the rush. And again, this is just putting together everything I can from scouting reports and whatnot. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and read a couple of scouting reports on Färhammar. You've got this from the Elite Prospects 2025 NHL Draft Guide. Färhammar is an active two-way defenseman with puck-moving ability. He has a physical edge to his game and plays the body whenever possible, creating breakups along the wall through pins and preventing multiple scoring chances from the slot across our viewings. And then this one comes to us from Linus Johnson of FC Hockey. Färhammar is a left shooting defenseman with great skating technique and good puck handling. He is very comfortable with the puck on his stick and is a puck-moving player, good at using body feints to get through traffic in the neutral zone. He's good at playing with his head up and can deliver hard and accurate passes quickly after receiving the puck. And then we'll do one more here. This is from Jock Anderson, also of FC Hockey. Färhammar is an agile skater with excellent stride mechanics, possessing good acceleration and top-end speed that enable him to join the rush and recover quickly on defense. So, yeah, a little bit of a pet project, but I think, for a 7th rounder, this is a solid pick. We'll see if we ever see him in the NHL, but it'll be interesting to track his progress as it is with all Ranger prospects. So we'll call it there. I also want to say thank you guys so much these last couple episodes for putting up with my voice. As you can probably tell, it's shot. Just a little under the weather, nothing too serious or anything like that. But yeah, thank you for dealing with that the last couple of episodes. But we'll call it there. Again, feel free to share any stories on Sam Rosen if you ever met him, in person. We're going to do an episode where we read stories about Sam a little bit later in the offseason here. And also Stefan Matteau. Game 7 double overtime against the Devils, Eastern Conference Final. Where you were, who you were with, what you were doing, how you reacted when Stefan Matteau scored that legendary goal for the New York Rangers. Would love to hear those stories and read them on a future episode of Locked On New York Rangers. But I figure we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @JCHIK17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.